Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone. We came back. That's a good sign. Okay, hold on here. I just have to get logged in.
It's kind of how it is when you come to this and go, they get logged in.
Get logged in. Yeah. So I'd like to continue with our book project. I realized, normally it would take me, maybe a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours to put together a Dharma talk, and this is the Dharma talk that got put together over 12 years. So, all right, let's see if I can screen share with you. All right, you can see it? All right, so when last we left this story, Bill and I had moved to San Diego, and we were in a lot of struggle financially and psychologically and in every other way, as people cast out of paradise tend to be. So I began to work at Harcourt Brace Yovanovitch, a prominent publisher of trade books and textbooks. I worked with my senior editor there to create from the ground up a new children's dictionary, the Lincoln Dictionary, for writing, which is still in print. It was very innovative. It incorporated brief articles about the craft of writing, and it used quotes from famous writers as example sentences in word definitions. This was unheard of in children's books. It also incorporated photos and illustrations with the text, just like this book. And this is where I learned to lay out pages on a tiny little back screen about this big, laying out page after page after page, 950 pages to the dictionary, all laid out by hand, each one a jigsaw puzzle. So it was a very fun project in which I got to argue with my senior editor about the meaning of life and the meaning of art and what is a word. So, but my marriage was breaking down, engulfed by Bill's persistent depression. Although he did not know it, his depression was actually caused by heart disease. He needed a 5-way heart bypass. Despite successful surgery, ultimately he returned to Wisconsin and we were divorced. It was a wrenching, heartbreaking loss for both of us and for Ben. By then, I had returned to graduate school, a small program for research and the teaching of writing, directed by Charles Cooper, who became my graduate advisor, my second creative partner, and my new parent. As I assisted in developing teaching methods and textbooks. In the first-year writing program under his expert guidance, I began to learn the craft of teaching. I learned so much with my first-year writing students who proved to be my perfect teachers. I also had the opportunity to work as a research associate with Mary Barr on the California Learning Record, which provided a way for K-12 teachers to document and evaluate student learning based on what they know and can do, rather than their errors or defects. I learned with her a holistic and positive way of seeing learning and making sense of it. She was a great mentor for me and for so many teachers and administrators. Later, I would expand this project to create a learning record for college level learners. Learningrecord.org is the website for that, which earned numerous awards. And even later still, I would develop the learning record for spiritual practice, which we now use in our own one-year research program. So there's Charles Cooper and Mary Barr in the photos, and there's our learning record website. I was also fortunate to take classes and study with Ed Hutchins in the cognitive science department and hang out in his lab. He taught me how to think in systems, in ecologies of knowing that included people, their environments, social structures, tools, and technologies. In his lab, he trained his graduate students and me in rigorous critical thinking and creative approaches to research. All of these influences factored into my dissertation, The Wealth of Reality, an Ecology of Composition, which received 2 national awards in my field. But that dissertation could never have been written if I had not met Joko, to whom we will turn now. Chapter 2, Joko. By 1990, I was in my second year of graduate school, working 3 jobs, teaching in the 3rd college writing program, and raising a young son as a single parent. I was stretched to the maximum, and I knew I needed something to support me. I began searching for Zen centers in San Diego. This was no easy task because the web had not yet been invented, and the Yellow Pages was no help, as Zen centers tended not to advertise. I'm not sure how I discovered that there were 2 Zen centers in the city. I wrote to each inquiring about their programs and schedules. From one, I received a 6-page typed, single-spaced letter from the teacher about how wonderful he was. From the other, a short handwritten note from Joko saying that they offered an orientation on Saturday mornings and that I might come and see for myself. It was not a difficult choice. And that is how I found myself one Saturday morning in April, looking for a Japanese temple and finding only a small, ordinary bungalow on a residential street in Pacific Beach. I was pretty sure I was in the wrong place as I hesitantly walked up the driveway. Mind you, no GPS. But I received a warm welcome and was brought to a small living room in the house next door, and a handful of other seekers. So right there was where the orientation was. I honestly don't recall what was said in the orientation, something about sitting upright and breathing. I was so surprised by this ordinary living room with its sofa, table and chairs, coffee table with books neatly stacked on it, and spectacular flower arrangement. But there was no sign of monks in robes with shaved heads. I had never met a Zen master in person, but I had seen pictures. A Zen master was a Japanese man with a shaved head and elegant black robes, a majestic, imposing presence. So I was filled with anticipation when the orientation leader said we would be meeting Joko. Soon we were ushered into Joko's tiny interview room, a bedroom in the back house, furnished only with a small altar on a side table and Joko herself sitting on a zafu and zabuton. She looked like anyone's grandmother, in her 70s, with gray hair, a wrinkled face, and eyes that were keen but kindly. She wore, improbably, a pink polo shirt and gray skirt tucked neatly around her knees. In front of her lay a small wooden staff with a curl at one end. But I felt immediately a powerful, energetic force radiating from her, as if I had laid my bare hands on an electric fence. "Ask me anything you like," she said. Apparently, the others felt nothing, because the questions they asked were mundane, even disrespectful. Noting the small staff, one young man asked, "Are you going to hit us with that?" I was shocked that he had even thought such a thing. I said nothing, stunned by her presence, her electric energy, even though she was simply sitting there with an amused smile. That was our first encounter. I left reeling and intimately connected with her somehow. I knew she would be my teacher. The little ranch house in Pacific Beach was nestled in an ordinary residential neighborhood of similar houses on a quiet, sunny street lined with palm trees. Occasionally, an ice cream truck would cruise slowly down the street, and sometimes you can hear its jingle from the Sting in the background of Joko's recorded talks. The Zen Center actually occupied 2 adjoining properties. There was a small 2-story house where Joko lived, with a garage apartment behind it. The Zendo itself had been converted from a 2-bedroom, 1-bath bungalow with a tiny kitchen and a garage that had been turned into a large kitchen with commercial stoves and refrigerators, where session meals were prepared. The wall between the living room and the main bedroom had been opened up so that the main Zendo was a long L shape, including what had been the living room, dining room, and bedroom. All of these rooms were very small, so the space could seat only about 20 people. Another 6 or so could fit in the second bedroom space. The whole house was filled with neat, orderly rows of black zabutons on pale, wall-to-wall carpeting. Sunlight streamed through large windows, filtered through blinds carefully adjusted during the day. Occasionally, you could hear the melodic sound of the wind chimes outside, lifted by a Pacific breeze. The feeling was calm, bright, intimate, and ordinary. Everything was clean, neat, and well maintained. Behind the zendo was another small house where Joko met students one-on-one for their Daison practice interview in the tiny room where I had first met her. In the living room, a line of zabutons wound around the room from the doorway. There we lined up waiting to see her in turn when she rang her bell. Just like we do in the back study, right? If you were at the front of the line, you rang the bell in front of you in response. Her door would open, and you and the student leaving would do a full bow to the altar before you were left utterly alone with her, as vast as the Pacific Ocean at her back, as clear as the spotless blue California sky above. Now, what can you say? But I had not gotten there yet. I had filled out an application for membership at ZCSD. With my schedule of graduate school, teaching, part-time work, and time with Ben, I was usually only able to come for the Wednesday evening program, 2 sitting periods with Kinhin between, followed by a short informal Dharma talk, sometimes by Joko, or otherwise by her students Elizabeth or Ezra. Daison with Joko was announced by her Jisha, standing in the doorway of the zendo. Daison with Joko is available for Zen Center members with a daily sitting practice. The first call is for members from out of town. After several months, I saw Elizabeth on the patio and asked when I might know if my application had been approved, so that as a member, I could see Joko and Daison. She looked startled and then laughed and then kindly said, "Everyone is approved. See her anytime." So it began. Because of that modest temple in an ordinary house, on an ordinary street, in an ordinary neighborhood, I knew what to do years later for my tiny Sangha in Austin that had proved their steadfast commitment in a storefront Unitarian church, in an elementary school cafeteria, sitting zazen on linoleum floors under buzzing fluorescent lights, and in a corner of a yoga studio, in another Zen Center's spare room, through my many absences for conferences and consulting, for academic leave spent in San Diego with Joko. Over 10 years, they had been faithful to the ordinary mind model Joko had created. What else could I do? I moved the Sangha, all 6 of them, into my house, moving the furniture out of the front, out of the living and dining room, and setting up an altar. Finally, a permanent altar. We painted the zendo a warm white together. It was September 5th, 2005, nearly 4 years after 9/11, and 1 year after I had been formally ordained as a Soto Zen priest at Austin Zen Center. All of that came much later, however. Everyone thinks I'm opposed to the forms of traditional Japanese Zen practice, she once told me. I'm not opposed to the forms. When they are properly done, they are beautiful. When we moved to San Diego and started the center, we were trying to do a formal practice here, but no one was trained. My daughter Brenda at that time was a foremost expert on Soto Zen Japanese ritual. When she came for a visit, she said, Mom, you're doing this all wrong. It's a mess. Nobody knows what they're doing. Just drop everything you don't need." So I stripped away everything that was not essential to the practice. And it was true. Her practice was spare. Zazen, Kinhin, Dharma talks, Daison. There were 2 daily chants. In the morning, the robe chant, although no one wore a robe, or even the Rakasu, the miniature variant. And after Zazen, the 4 practice principles. These were rendered in fresh translations she developed with the poet Alan Capro. At the end, there were 3 full bows. In the whole time I was with Joko, I never saw a ceremony or even a full Zen service. They never even chanted the Heart Sutra. She once told me that the Sangha was not ready for the Heart Sutra. But she had kept Zazen, pure Zazen, on Zafus and Zabutons, the wooden clappers that summoned folks for Zazen, the 3 bells that signaled the start of a sitting period, 2 bells for Kinhin, and 1 bell to end Zazen. It was utter simplicity. And then there were the sesshins, also spare and powerful. Joko was quick to point out to me, I'm not the only one doing this. There are others, Tony Packer and others as well. but I had no idea of practice in other places or of the many formal aspects of Soto Zen practice in the Japanese tradition, the teachings of Zen ancestors, or even the history of Buddhism. Joko and ZCSD and a few books on Zen were my entire Zen universe. It was a simple, beautiful, and ordinary universe, and perfectly necessary to me. Joko told me she'd been invited to meet with the teachers at Naropa, a Tibetan Buddhist university in Boulder that had been founded by Chogyam Trungpa. She had been sharply critical of the special world they were creating, apart from their students' everyday lives, so that some students had even left their jobs, gotten divorced, abandoned their friends. Joko was strong in her criticism, both with them and to me afterwards. Later, I learned that at dinner with the senior teachers, Joko had turned to one and asked, "How do you practice with your anger?" The teacher gave some response, but she was annoyed. She had been teaching and practicing for 25 years. She didn't have anger. She drove home in a fury, but halfway there, she recognized her situation. I know this because she told me herself. After Joko's visit, she and another senior teacher came secretly, under assumed names, to a session with Joko. While I was staying in the garage apartment, they came back from Daesan with her, looking shell-shocked. Literally, their hair was standing on end. Now we finally understand what our Tibetan teachers have been trying to teach us all these years. But we thought it was because they were men, or because of the language barrier, or the cultural differences, that we just didn't get it. She was still stunned. "Joko is 1 in a million, she said. "Well, yes," I replied, "that's why we are here." Joko didn't have a residential center, but she let me stay there in the garage apartment whenever I had a semester leave from UT. During sessions, the apartment would be taken over by session participants sleeping on every square inch of the floor. Otherwise, it was all mine. During the day, I would often drive up the coast to UCSD and hang out with Ed Hutchins and the grad students in his distributed cognition lab. I went to lab meetings studying how he was mentoring and instructing those emerging cognitive scientists. I wanted to know how to better foster our own graduate students working in the CWRL and to learn more about this way of teaching. We'd often have lunch among the eucalyptus trees, talking about cognitive science, teaching, and his current project on navigation in high-tech environments. As I drove home, I stopped at La Jolla Shores and sat on the beach, letting the sound of the surf wash through me until the gorgeous Pacific sunset. Mornings, I sat zazen with the few people who showed up, and sometimes went out to breakfast with one or two. In between, I had time to see Joko in her little house. She was quite busy with phone Daesan, talking to students all over the world, and I tried to allow her space. I didn't want to bother her. Now I consider that a grave mistake. I guess I didn't trust her to protect that space and time herself. But mostly, it was that childhood conditioning that parents wrapped up in their own lives did not welcome the interruptions and inconvenience of children. We're not actually interested in us. We were on our own mostly. And it was best if we were either quiet and invisible or entertaining. I couldn't imagine entertaining Joko, so quiet and invisible it was. It never occurred to me that she might enjoy my companionship, despite all of the evidence of that. Still, we had many wonderful conversations. When I lamented that teaching and directing the CWRL left me without much time for practice beyond my morning zazen and kept me from coming for sessions, she promptly replied, "Your lab is your zendo." She was eager to learn more about what I was studying. When I talked with her about Hakomi training, she asked if there was a book she could read about it. I ordered Ron Kurtz's Body-Centered Psychotherapy, and it arrived the next day. I gave it to her that afternoon, and by the next morning she had read the first chapter and had questions for me about it. "I think this would help some of my students," she remarked. Then she fixed me with her steely gaze. "We've got to get more efficient," she said. She began to ask me for advice about some of her students, or she would describe a practice, something I'm asking my senior students to try. I felt honored that she would confide in me something for her senior students. I wondered who these advanced students could be. When did they meet with her? Where did they live? How did they get to be senior students? It never crossed my mind, although I would go ahead and diligently work with the practice, that she considered me a senior student. gradually, I found out more about Joko's background as we talked. Stop right there. And we have maybe 2 minutes for anything you might want to say so far.
I love hearing this. It's honestly,
It's okay?
it's fabulous.
Okay, all right. You're my main audience. If you feel there's something tedious or boring about it, I need to know, right?
Would you mind continuing for 5 or 10 more minutes?
Well, some people have to leave for work,
We have to-
so we have to stop here and leave you hanging. Friday, we will continue on, right?
Episode 3,
Yes,
the
episode
Netflix
3.
series.
So you can imagine, there's another 300 pages of this. So I don't know how it's gonna all turn out, but you're who I'm writing for, and you're the ones that I hope can enjoy it.
I've been part of the New York Zen Center Commit to Sit 90 Day with Joko's book, and they had Diane Rossetto talk, and they had her talk as one of Joko's students, and the flavor Peg is offering of Joko is so different from Diane. I felt by the end of that, I don't think this woman liked Joko. Yeah, it was very interesting, and so I'm really glad to get to learn this side of Joko.
It's very personal, you know her from her writing, but this is my encounter with her and what I experienced, so,
And I went with her twice, late in her life.
Yeah.
I'll talk about that.
yeah.
For details, describing the texture of the environment and the room and walking up the driveway, all of that is very helpful to take us there. It's really like you don't find that anywhere else.
So you don't think that's extraneous, because that's what I,
No, it helps. It grounds us in what your experience was and who she was.
It's also familiar.
you can see how this,
When you were describing her house, I was like,
a little house and back. All right, thank you so much for indulging me in this.
Just a moment, Peg. We just have it. If you got a moment for Bridget, she's just had a hand up for her. And before we see Bridget a moment, could I just ask, will it be an audio book? Because the way you read it brings it all so much to life, and you can feel everything. And it would be just such a wonderful experience to have you on audio.
The audiobook would be another thing, yeah.
Another thing, thank you though, thank you for that thought. Bridget?
Okay, I was gonna ask if you'd make it an audiobook too, and it's like being in 4th grade. My 4th grade teacher had a magic carpet under her desk, and we put our heads down on the desk, and she read this every day after lunch. So that's what I.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you all later.
I
Bye, lots of love.
lots of
Bye,
love.
Ellen. Love to you, Ellen.
Bye, see you later.